Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep failing, no matter how hard I try? We've all been there. Moments when dreams feel too heavy, when life seems unfair, and when failure feels like a permanent stamp on our destiny. But failure is not the end. It's a hidden teacher, waiting for us to listen. Picture a young man walking home after yet another rejection. His hands tremble as he clutches a letter. We regret to inform you, it wasn't his first failure. In fact, it felt like his 100th. He wanted to quit. He thought, maybe I'm just not good enough. But one night, something changed. Instead of asking, why me, he asked, what can I learn? He began to see every failure not as proof of weakness, but as training for strength. Slowly, he built resilience. Step by step, he transformed rejection into redirection. Years later, that same young man stood on a stage, applauded by thousands, sharing how the lessons from his failures built the foundation of his success. The truth is this: failure doesn't define you. Your response does. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but in his hands it felt like a stone. He sat at the small wooden desk in his room, staring at the university's crest stamped on the corner. His breath slowed, his chest tightening with every second he delayed opening it. He already knew what it said. He didn't need to tear it open to understand. He had felt this moment before, too many times before, but still, he slid a trembling finger under the flap and pulled out the sheet inside. His eyes scanned the words, but the sentence that mattered stood out immediately. We regret to inform you, that phrase again. It almost echoed inside his head, bouncing against the walls of memory. He had seen it written in emails and letters, heard it in the tone of professors, in the sighs of employers. It was becoming less of a phrase and more of a prophecy. His throat closed. The paper blurred as his eyes watered, though he refused to let a single tear drop. He pressed his lips together until they hurt, trying to push down the wave of frustration, of shame, of that gnawing question. Why always me? The room was silent, except for the ticking of a cheap plastic clock on the wall. He felt like the sound was mocking him, each second reminding him that life was moving forward without him. Time was slipping through his fingers, and he was standing still, stuck in this endless loop of rejection. He leaned back in the chair and let the letter fall from his hands. It drifted to the floor with no weight, no sound, as if it wasn't destroying him. He wanted it to shatter like glass, to explode, to prove how heavy it was on his soul. But it didn't. It was just a sheet of paper, meaningless to anyone else, but to him, it was everything. The memories began to flood back. The test results pinned on school bulletin boards where his name always fell short. The scholarship interview where the panel exchanged polite smiles but never called back. The countless nights hunched over books, whispering promises to himself that this time would be different. And every time the same ending, he thought about the people around him, the classmates who moved forward, celebrating their admissions, their jobs, their successes. He could see their posts online, smiling faces holding acceptance letters, parents hugging them, captions filled with excitement and hope. He scrolled past them quickly, pretending not to care, but the images burned themselves into his mind. They were proof that he was falling behind, proof that he wasn't enough. He grabbed the fallen letter from the floor, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it across the room. It hit the wall, landed by the trash bin, not even making it inside. His anger fizzled into exhaustion. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes until he saw stars behind his eyelids. All the energy he had put into this application, all the nights of editing essays, the hours of second-guessing his words, ended in this. Another rejection. Another failure. The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the familiarity. The numbness creeping in after the sting. He hated that he was getting used to it. Rejection wasn't supposed to feel normal. Failure wasn't supposed to be a routine. But for him, it was. He dragged himself toward the bed and sat at the edge. His chest felt heavy. His shoulders slumped forward. His body carried the weight of all those moments. Every no, every not good enough, every door that shut in his face. It was more than just disappointment. It was a suffocating sense of inevitability. As if failure had claimed him, had stamped his name, had decided his fate. And for the first time that night, a terrifying thought whispered into his mind. What if this is who I am? What if failure isn't just something I face, but something I am? The silence of the room deepened. The letter still lay by the trash, a crumpled symbol of his struggle. He stared at it for a long time, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists. The pain was sharp, yes, but beneath it, there was also something else. Something restless. Something that refused to die, no matter how much rejection tried to bury it. The house was asleep. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound breaking the silence. Outside, the streetlights painted the empty road with pale orange light, stretching shadows across his wall through the blinds. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his body still, but his mind wide awake, restless, loud, merciless. Every failure he had ever faced replayed like a reel in his head. The rejection letter from the morning wasn't just a single moment anymore. It was a door to all the others. One failure opened another. One wound reopened 10 more. He closed his eyes, hoping the darkness would calm him, but instead, it only made the voices louder. Not good enough. You should have done better. Everyone else is moving ahead, and you're still here. He turned over, pressing his face into the pillow, but the thoughts didn't stop. They marched through his brain in relentless waves. He thought about the scholarship interview where he stumbled over one answer and saw the polite disappointment in the panel's eyes. He thought about the teacher who once told him, almost casually, some people just aren't cut out for this path. Those words, spoken years ago, still clawed at his self-worth. The clock on his nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. He had to be up in a few hours, but sleep felt impossible. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. His room looked different at this hour, colder somehow, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. He walked over to the small desk in the corner, where a stack of notebooks sat. He opened one. The pages were filled with plans, schedules, goals, affirmations he had once written to keep himself focused. Work hard now, shine later. Failure is only the beginning. The words stared back at him, almost mocking him. Once, they had been fuel. Now they felt like lies. He slammed the notebook shut and buried his face in his hands. His chest tightened, his breathing uneven. There was a kind of loneliness in failure that no one talked about. People saw the results, but they never saw the silent nights like this. The war fought inside four walls, when no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when the only company is doubt. He stood and walked to the window. The world outside was calm, sleeping. A car passed in the distance, headlights cutting through the dark before vanishing again. He felt invisible, small, like the universe was moving without him. Somewhere out there, people were celebrating victories, signing contracts, boarding planes to new opportunities. And here he was, staring at nothing, his chest full of unspoken questions. "Why me?" he whispered to himself. His voice cracked in the silence, almost startling him. "Why can't I get it right?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as they always were. He pressed his forehead against the glass, the cold biting his skin, grounding him for a moment. His reflection stared back. Tired eyes, messy hair, a face weighed down not just by exhaustion but by something deeper. He thought about quitting. The thought arrived like a shadow, slipping quietly into his mind. What if he just stopped trying? What if he let go of this fight, accepted that maybe he wasn't meant for the things he was chasing? He imagined the relief of no longer applying, no longer waiting for answers that broke him. But the thought, though tempting, left a hollow feeling in his chest. Because as much as failure hurt, as much as doubt clawed at him, there was a truth he couldn't escape. Deep down, he still wanted more. Deep down, a small voice still whispered that he wasn't done yet. That maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could be different. The clock now read 3:32 a.m. He dragged himself back to bed, the silence still heavy, the doubt still loud. He laid down, staring at the ceiling once more. He didn't know if tomorrow would bring change, or just another letter, another we regret. But he knew one thing. The weight of tonight would follow him into the morning. And yet, somewhere within that weight, buried deep under the doubts, was a spark that refused to go out. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like an extension of last night. The doubts, the heaviness, the exhaustion. He dragged himself out of bed and shuffled toward the bathroom, the cold tiles stinging his bare feet. When he looked into the mirror, he didn't just see his face. He saw failure staring back. His eyes were puffy, his shoulders slumped. He leaned closer, resting his hands on the sink. The mirror had a cruel way of showing more than just appearance. It reflected the truth he tried to hide. You're not good enough. That's what he saw written in the lines under his tired eyes. But the mirror wasn't the only place he faced judgment. The world outside was even harsher. Scrolling through his phone, he saw pictures of classmates in suits, smiling at their new jobs, posting about promotions, or sharing photos from internships in cities he once dreamed of living in. The captions were full of words like blessed, grateful, excited for the next chapter. He wanted to be happy for them, but each post was like a dagger, twisting deeper into his insecurities. He thought about James, his childhood friend. They had once shared the same classroom, the same struggles, the same late-night study sessions. But now James was in another country, working at a prestigious company, while he was still here, collecting rejection letters, stacking failures like bricks on his back. He remembered James calling once, voice filled with excitement, talking about how everything was falling into place. And he had forced a smile on the phone, pretending to be happy, while inside, envy burned quietly like acid. Comparison was a poison. He knew it. He had read quotes, listened to speeches, all telling him not to measure his life against others. But how could he not? The world shoved success in his face at every turn. Billboards, advertisements, social media feeds, all screaming the same message. Everyone is moving forward. Why aren't you? He tossed his phone aside and sat on the edge of his bed, his chest heavy. It wasn't just failure anymore. It was a feeling of being left behind, like running a race where everyone else had sprinted ahead, and he was stuck at the starting line, gasping for air, his legs weighed down by invisible chains. He looked back at the mirror. "Why not me?" he whispered. His reflection stared back in silence, unkind and unanswering. The silence was deafening. The day stretched on. He went outside, trying to escape the suffocating air of his room. But the world outside wasn't kinder. Passing by a cafe, he overheard two people around his age talking about their new careers. One of them laughed. "I can't believe how far we've come since college." Their laughter carried, light and easy, while he walked by with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his head low, feeling like a ghost among the living. Comparison wasn't just in mirrors or on screens. It was in voices, in laughter, in every reminder that life was moving forward for everyone else while he was stuck replaying failures like a broken record. That night, as he lay down again, the weight pressed harder. He wasn't only failing. He was failing while everyone else was winning. And that, he thought, was the heaviest burden of all. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes the air feel heavier. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, unable to close his eyes. The past had a way of visiting him when he was most vulnerable, when the noise of the world had died down and all that was left was him, his thoughts, and the shadows creeping across his walls. At first, it was just a faint memory, the sound of a teacher's voice from years ago. "You're smart, you just need to focus." The voice was soft, almost encouraging, but like smoke, it twisted and transformed into harsher tones. His father's disappointed sigh. His mother's forced smile as she said, "It's okay, maybe next time." That phrase, "maybe next time," echoed like a curse, a reminder that next time had come and gone, and still, nothing had changed. He turned over, pressing his face into the pillow, trying to bury the whispers. But memories don't die in silence. They grow louder. Suddenly, he was 15 again, standing on a basketball court, the ball in his trembling hands. The crowd cheered. The game was tied, and he had the chance to win it all. But his shot clanged off the rim, bouncing out as the buzzer screamed. His teammates slumped in defeat, while the other team erupted in joy. That night, he cried in the locker room, repeating to himself, "I'll do better next time." Then he was 18, opening his first college acceptance letter. Except it wasn't acceptance. It was a rejection. The words were polite, even kind, but they cut him to the bone. His friends were celebrating their futures, and he was swallowing disappointment behind a fake smile. He told himself, I'll prove him wrong someday. Now he was 25, sitting in a dark room, still haunted by the same voices, the same words, the same cycle. He sat up abruptly, unable to take it anymore. The whispers of the past weren't just memories. They were ghosts, lingering, mocking, reminding him that failure wasn't new. It had always been there, tracing his steps, shaping his life, waiting for moments of weakness to pounce. He walked to his desk and opened an old drawer. Inside were scraps of his younger self. Essays he never finished, drawings he abandoned, notebooks full of plans that never materialized. Each page was like a gravestone, marking the death of a dream. He flipped through them, his chest tightening. Scribbles of ambition, crossed-out goals, unfinished beginnings. A memory hit him like a storm. His grandmother's voice, gentle and warm, telling him at age 10, "You are destined for something great, my boy. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." He had believed her then. He had carried those words like armor. But now, those same words felt like chains, because he hadn't lived up to them. He hadn't become great. He hadn't even become good enough. Tears welled up, uninvited but unstoppable. He slammed the notebook shut, tossed it back into the drawer, and shut it hard. But the ghosts didn't go away. They lingered in the corners of the room, in the back of his mind, whispering, "You've always failed. You always will." He pressed his palms to his face, shaking his head as if he could shake the voices out. But they were louder now, colliding with the echoes of recent rejection, building into a chorus of failure. It was too much. He curled into himself, clutching the blanket tight, feeling like a child again, lost, small, powerless. And as the whispers of the past closed in around him, one thought clawed at his mind. Maybe this is all I'll ever be. The silence of the night returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of everything he couldn't escape. The morning sunlight spilled into the small apartment, golden and warm. But to him it felt like a spotlight he didn't deserve. He dragged himself out of bed, his body heavy, as if the night's memories had settled into his bones. Today wasn't supposed to be different, but he still hoped it might be, until his phone buzzed. A message from an old friend blinked on the screen. At first, his chest lifted. Maybe it was good news. But when he opened it, the word stung. "Saw you at the interview last week. Tough luck, huh? Don't worry, man. Some people just aren't cut out for that kind of job." Some people. That's what he was now. Not an individual with dreams. Not someone who had tried. Just some people lumped into the faceless crowd of failures. He could almost hear the smirk in the message, hidden behind the veil of fake sympathy. As he scrolled, more reminders flooded in. Social media posts of former classmates, celebrating promotions, engagements, new houses. Captions like "hard work pays off" and "dreams do come true." Each one felt like a dagger, twisted with the unspoken question. Why not you? He closed the apps, but the voices followed him out the door. At the corner store, he ran into a neighbor, an older man with kind eyes who smiled politely. "How's everything going?" the man asked. It was casual, but the words hit like an interrogation. He forced a smile and muttered, "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He could see it in the neighbor's eyes. The flicker of pity, that subtle softening of tone reserved for those who were falling behind. The kind that said, "We both know you're not okay, but I won't embarrass you by saying it." By the time he made it back home, the mockery and pity had woven themselves together into a net, trapping him in shame. He sat on the couch, staring at the walls, remembering every laugh that had ever been at his expense. The way his classmates had snickered when he stumbled over an answer in school. The way a coach once muttered, "He'll never make it." The way co-workers whispered after his projects failed. It wasn't just their words. It was their faces. The smirks, the raised eyebrows, the fake encouragement laced with doubt. And then, worse, the pity, the way people tilted their heads and softened their voices, as if speaking to someone broken. That was the part that gutted him the most. Because mockery burned for a moment, but pity lasted. Pity was a reminder that they no longer saw him as an equal, but as someone to be tolerated, pitied, excused. He felt anger rising, but it collapsed into despair. He thought of calling someone, anyone, to talk. But what would he say? That he was tired of being laughed at? Tired of the sideways glances? He didn't want sympathy. He wanted respect. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. He could almost hear the walls closing in, whispering the same refrain. You are the failure everyone thinks you are. For a long moment he sat frozen, trapped between rage and sorrow, mockery and pity, the weight of being seen as less. And in that silence, a truth cut through him like ice. It wasn't just that the world doubted him. It was that he was starting to doubt himself. The mirror in the bathroom was cracked at the edge, a thin line running to the glass like a scar. He leaned over the sink, water dripping from his face, and stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him felt like a stranger. The eyes were hollow, the skin pale, the jaw tight with exhaustion. He hated what he saw, not just a tired face, but everything it represented. Every failure clung to him like a stain that couldn't be washed away. His shoulders sagged, not from physical weight, but from years of disappointments that had settled into his very posture. He pressed his palms against the sink, gripping hard, as if holding himself up by force. Memories replayed in flashes, missed opportunities, interviews that ended in rejection, ideas dismissed before they were even tested. Each scene felt like a punch. The more he remembered, the deeper the self-loathing grew. A voice inside him whispered cruelly, "You're not just failing at things. You are the failure." He tried to silence it, but the voice only grew louder. It reminded him of the things he once promised himself. I'll succeed by 25. I'll make my family proud. I'll prove everyone wrong. Instead, he was past 25, stuck in a cycle of rejection, with nothing to show but a pile of regret. Walking into the living room, he caught sight of old notebooks stacked in a corner. They were filled with dreams, plans, goals, sketches of ideas he once believed in. He picked one up, flipped through its pages, and felt a surge of disgust. The handwriting was filled with hope, with certainty. Who was that person? Certainly not the man standing here now. He threw the notebook down. It landed with a dull thud that echoed through the quiet room. The silence was unbearable. He turned on the TV just to drown out his thoughts, but the noise only sharpened them. Commercials with smiling faces, movies where underdogs always rose to the top. It all felt like mockery. He wasn't an underdog. He wasn't climbing. He was sinking. And worse, he believed he deserved it. The hatred wasn't only for his failures. It was for himself. For not being strong enough. For not working harder. For not being smart enough, brave enough, persistent enough. For being the kind of person people pitied. That thought burned. He wanted to escape it. To crawl out of his own skin. He paced the room, fists clenched, fighting the urge to scream. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined running, just leaving everything behind. But he knew he'd carry the same broken reflection with him wherever he went. He sank into the couch, head in his hands. The weight of his failures wasn't just external anymore. It was inside him, corrosive, eating away at who he was. The hatred became his constant companion, a shadow that followed him into every thought. And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. The world didn't have to destroy him. He was already doing it himself. The phone buzzed once, twice, then stopped. He didn't even look at it. He already knew what it was. Another friend checking in, another invitation he would ignore, another reminder of the world he had quietly stepped away from. The walls of his apartment felt tighter these days, as if they were inching closer with every rejection, every failure, every night he spent alone. What once felt like a safe space was now a cage. The curtains stayed closed, the dishes piled up in the sink, and the silence was so thick it pressed against his chest. Isolation wasn't sudden. It had crept in slowly, like fog rolling over a city at dawn. At first, he told himself he just needed a break, a few days away from everyone to reset, to think. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before long, the outside world became a place he didn't belong to anymore. Friends stopped calling as often. Their texts grew shorter. Some gave up altogether. He didn't blame them. How many times could he say, "I'm fine," when everyone knew he wasn't? How many times could he show up at gatherings and pretend to laugh while his failures gnawed at him? It was easier not to show up at all. But loneliness has a sound. It's the echo of your own footsteps in an empty apartment. It's the hollow creak of the floorboards at midnight. It's the way your own voice surprises you when you accidentally speak aloud. He began talking less. His words shrank to grunts, mutters, half-finished sentences. Some nights, he realized he hadn't spoken to another human being all day. That silence was louder than any crowd he had ever been in. The worst part wasn't missing others. It was forgetting himself. The things that once gave him joy, music, writing, late-night walks, now felt distant, almost foreign. He'd pick up his guitar, strum a few chords, then put it down in frustration. He'd open his notebook, stare at the blank page, then close it again. Nothing sparked. Nothing moved. Isolation made him invisible. And in some twisted way, he began to believe invisibility was what he deserved. When he did step outside, just for groceries or to breathe air that wasn't stale, he noticed how different the world seemed. People laughed, moved quickly, carried purpose in their steps. He, on the other hand, shuffled quietly, hoping no one would recognize the emptiness on his face. Every smile he saw on strangers felt like another reminder that he had lost something unnameable. Back home, he sat by the window, looking out at a city alive without him. Neon lights flickered. Cars rushed past. People hurried through their own lives. And he was just still, a ghost behind glass. The isolation wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. It convinced him that he was cut off, not just from others, but from possibility itself. The future, once a wide-open road, now looked like a locked door he didn't have a key for. And every time he thought about breaking free, about calling someone, about stepping back into life, the same thought stopped him cold. Why would anyone want me back? The world had moved on, and he wasn't sure if he even remembered how to catch up. It started like any other night. Dim light from the desk lamp, an unfinished meal on the table, and a silence so sharp it cut deeper than any sound could. He sat there staring at the mess of papers scattered in front of him. Job applications, rejection emails printed out in some strange act of self-punishment, and notebooks filled with ideas that never made it past page 1. His eyes scanned the words on a rejection letter he had read 100 times already. The sentences blurred together, but he knew them by heart. We regret to inform you. We appreciate your interest. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Polite words for a brutal truth. You're not good enough. That night, something inside him snapped. The weight of every failure, every closed door, every empty night crushed him all at once. His chest tightened. His breath grew shallow. He slammed his fist on the desk, sending pens and papers flying. Why? The word ripped out of him, raw and broken. He wasn't even sure who he was shouting at. The world, God, himself. Why can't I get it right? Why do I always fall short? His voice cracked, echoing against the walls. The silence that followed felt heavier than the outburst itself. He stood up, pacing, pulling at his hair, his hands trembling. Rage and despair collided inside him, an emotional storm he couldn't contain. For months, he had swallowed his pain, pretending it didn't eat at him. Tonight, it erupted. He grabbed a notebook, ripped it in half, then another. Pages scattered across the floor like pieces of a broken dream. His reflection in the window caught his eye. Eyes swollen, face hollow, jaw clenched. He didn't recognize the person staring back. Suddenly, his knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, hands clutching his face. The tears came fast, unstoppable. He cried until his body shook, until his breath turned ragged. Every failure replayed in his mind. The opportunities lost, the people who doubted him, the promises he made himself that he couldn't keep. It was a reel of disappointment on endless repeat, and he was trapped inside it. He whispered through the sobs, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am nothing." The thought scared him, not because he believed it fully, but because part of him did. The breaking point wasn't just about one rejection, one failure. It was about years of carrying weight that no one else could see. Tonight, it was too much. The floor was cold beneath him, the room spinning. For a moment, He thought about disappearing altogether, not just from the room, but from the world. The temptation of escape whispered louder than ever. What if you didn't have to feel this anymore? But then, in the middle of the chaos, something small, almost imperceptible, happened. A memory. His grandmother's voice. Soft, steady, a fragment from years ago. When the night feels endless, remember, the sun is already on its way. It hit him like a lifeline. He clung to it, repeating it in his mind, again and again. The tears didn't stop, but something shifted. He wasn't healed. He wasn't strong. But he wasn't gone either. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the crack that let something else in, a whisper of hope, fragile, but alive. The night after the breakdown, the room was still a mess. Papers crumpled on the floor, notebooks torn, rejection letters scattered like the aftermath of a storm. But there was something different in the air, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't peace. It wasn't strength. It was survival. He woke late, eyes swollen from crying, body heavy as if he had carried stones in his sleep. For a long time, he just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. The silence felt different this morning, not suffocating, but hollow, empty. He looked at the window. Sunlight slipped in through the blinds, striking the corner of a photo on the wall. It was him, years ago, standing with his grandmother outside their small house. She was holding his hand, smiling with the kind of faith that seemed unshakable. The same voice he had heard in his darkest moment whispered back to him. When the night feels endless, the sun is already on its way. For the first time in weeks, he let out a breath that wasn't sharp with anger or despair. It was shaky, but it carried something, like the faintest echo of relief. He dragged himself to the kitchen. The sink was full of dirty dishes, remnants of nights spent too consumed by failure to care. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The small sound of water boiling filled the silence. It was nothing, but it was something. As the steam rose, he thought about what happened last night, how close he had come to losing himself completely. The thought terrified him, but it also woke something inside him. Maybe hitting rock bottom wasn't just a collapse. Maybe it was a ground to push off from. With a cup of tea in his hand, he sat by the window. For the first time in a long time, he didn't open his laptop to scroll through job listings that felt like dead ends. He just sat. He watched the sunlight creep across the floor, inch by inch. It felt like proof that time was still moving, even if he wasn't. And then quietly a thought surfaced. What if I haven't failed? What if I'm just not done yet? It startled him. He wasn't used to hearing anything but doubt inside his own head. The thought wasn't loud, it wasn't convincing, but it was stubborn. It sat there, refusing to leave. He picked up a notebook, one of the few that hadn't been ripped apart, and flipped through the pages. Scribbles, half-formed ideas, plans that never came alive. Normally, he would have looked at them with shame. But this morning, he felt something different. Curiosity. What if these weren't symbols of failure? What if they were beginnings he hadn't finished? His phone buzzed. A message from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in months. Hey, been thinking about you. You good. He stared at the screen for a long time. Normally, he would have ignored it, too ashamed to admit how far he had fallen. But today, his fingers hovered. Then, almost without thinking, he typed, "Not really, but I'm trying." It was the first honest thing he had said in a long time. The reply came within seconds. "That's enough. Proud of you, man. Let's catch up soon." He smiled. Barely, faintly, but it was real. It wasn't a miracle. His life wasn't fixed. The rejection still sat in a pile on the floor. His future was still uncertain. But there, in the smallest cracks, light had begun to slip through. The flicker of hope was fragile, like a candle in the wind. But he held on to it with both hands. Because sometimes a flicker is all you need to remember that the darkness doesn't last forever. The next morning wasn't easier. Hope didn't erase the heaviness in his chest. The rejection letters didn't vanish. The mirror still reflected the same tired eyes. But something was different. So small it was almost invisible. He got up. That was it. That was the difference. He got up. Not dragged, not stumbled. He chose to rise. It was a decision so ordinary that most people wouldn't notice it. But for him, it felt like defiance against the weight that had pinned him down for months. The air outside was crisp, the kind that wakes you whether you want to or not. He stepped out of the apartment, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders tight with uncertainty. The streets looked the same, but he felt like a stranger walking through them, like someone relearning how to move through a world that had forgotten him. At the corner, he stopped by a small cafe he used to visit when things were better. He hadn't been there in ages, afraid of being seen, afraid of facing people who might remember him differently. But today, his legs carried him inside almost without permission. The bell above the door jingled. The smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around him like an old memory. He stood awkwardly near the counter until the barista, someone new, someone who didn't know his past, smiled and asked, "What can I get for you?" For a moment, he froze. The question felt larger than coffee. What can I get for you? What do you deserve? Do you even belong here? Then, with a quiet breath, he answered, "Just the black coffee." It wasn't the drink that mattered. It was the act. Ordering, paying, waiting. Participating in the rhythm of life again. He sat by the window, sipping slowly, watching people walk by. No one was watching him. No one was judging him. And in that anonymity, he felt safe. He pulled out his notebook again, flipping to a fresh page. The pen trembled slightly in his hand. He wasn't ready to write grand plans. He wasn't ready to dream big. But he wrote 3 small words at the top of the page. Just keep moving. They weren't perfect. They weren't profound. But they were his. Later that day, he called a friend who had messaged him. Their conversation was awkward at first, full of long pauses and unfinished sentences. But eventually laughter slipped through. It was rusty, out of practice, but real. That night, as he lay in bed, he realized something. Hope wasn't a flood. It was a drip, a single drop, then another, filling the cracks slowly. And small steps, walking to the cafe, writing 3 words, answering a text, were how the cracks widened. For the first time in months, he didn't dread tomorrow. He wasn't excited, not yet, but he wasn't afraid of it either. And that was progress. The next morning when the alarm rang, he didn't hit snooze. He stood up, stretched, and whispered to himself, "One more step." Because healing wasn't about giant leaps. It was about stringing together small steps until, one day, you look back and realize you've traveled miles. The morning sun spilled through his blinds, brighter than it had felt in months. He rose not with the heaviness of obligation, but with a faint sense of anticipation. Something inside him whispered that today might be different, though he couldn't explain why. He sat at his desk, notebook open, yesterday's words staring back at him. Just keep moving. His pen hovered above the page, hesitant, then pressed down with a certainty that surprised even him. For the first time, instead of writing about what he lost, he began to write about what could still be built. The words were clumsy at first, like a child learning to walk. But they came. Paragraphs spilled, ideas shaped themselves, and before he knew it, 2 hours had passed. When he finally leaned back, his hand cramped and his coffee cold, he realized he had something he hadn't felt in a long time, momentum. Later that afternoon, he took another risk, small but bold. He revisited an old contact from his past, someone he'd once worked with before failure became his shadow. His thumb hovered over the send button for what felt like forever. What if they ignored him? What if they remembered only his collapse? But he pressed it anyway. Minutes ticked like hours. Doubt clawed back into his chest. Then ping, a reply. Not just polite, but warm. They remembered him. They believed in him enough to say, "Let's catch up. Maybe there's something we can work on." He stared at the message, stunned. His heart raced. It was only a meeting, not a promise. But it was something, a thread to hold on to in the dark. He had taken a step, and the world hadn't punished him for it. The world had answered. That night, he replayed the moment over and over. Not because the opportunity itself was massive, but because of what it represented. Proof that his failures didn't define him forever. Proof that doors are still open, even after so many had slammed shut. He thought back to all the nights lying awake, convinced he was finished, that no one would ever believe in him again. And now, Here was a simple message saying otherwise. Lying in bed, he smiled faintly to himself. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a redemption in flashing lights. It was just a reply, a chance, a possibility. But for someone who'd been living under the crushing weight of failure, that single crack of light felt like sunrise. For the first time, he whispered to himself not in despair, but in belief. Maybe I'm not done yet. And as he closed his eyes, the fear that used to greet him every night was replaced by something softer. Hope that tomorrow could hold more than survival. The morning of his meeting felt different from any other day in the past year. He dressed slowly, carefully, as if each button, each fold of fabric carried weight. His old suit hung loosely on him. He had lost weight during the months of isolation, but it still fit well enough to remind him of who he once was. Standing in front of the mirror, he caught his own eyes and, for the first time in ages, didn't look away. The walk to the cafe was long, not because of distance, but because of what it symbolized. Every step felt like a fight against a part of him that still whispered, "You don't belong here. You'll mess this up." But with each stride, that voice weakened, replaced by a stronger rhythm in his chest. Just show up. Just try. The cafe buzzed with conversation and the clinking of coffee cups. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on her, his old colleague. She looked up, smiled, and waved him over. That smile alone nearly broke him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guarded. It was genuine, as if nothing had been lost between them. Their conversation started cautiously, like stepping onto thin ice. He stumbled over his words at first, fumbling to explain where he had been, what happened. But she didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply listened, nodding softly, letting him spill years of silence into that single table. Then, something remarkable happened. She leaned in, her voice warm and steady, and said, "You've been through hell, but you're still here. That means you're stronger than you think. And honestly, I could use someone with that kind of grit on my team." He froze. For a moment, the words didn't register. But when they did, he felt the air rush back into his lungs. An offer, a chance, not out of charity, but because she truly believed he had value. The days that followed were not without struggle. He stumbled often, second-guessed himself, and battled waves of old doubt. But with each task completed, each responsibility handled, something inside him grew sturdier. His rhythm returned. His focus sharpened. There were moments, small yet powerful, that fueled his spirit. Finishing a project on time, hearing someone say "good job," catching himself smiling at his own work. These were not grand victories, but they tasted sweeter than anything he felt in years. At night, when exhaustion pulled at his body, he didn't collapse from despair. He collapsed from effort, from doing. And that difference meant everything. One evening, after a long day of work, he walked home past the same city streets that once made him feel invisible. But this time, the lights seemed brighter, the sounds fuller. He was part of the world again, not as a ghost, but as a man moving forward, standing at his apartment window, looking out at the city alive with possibility. He realized something profound. Progress doesn't come as a tidal wave. It comes in drops, steady and patient, until one day you look around and see you're no longer drowning. You're learning to swim. And for the first time, he felt not just alive, but awake. The weeks that followed were not dramatic, not filled with fireworks or sudden miracles. They were quieter, steadier, yet in those ordinary days, something extraordinary was happening. He was changing, brick by brick, victory by victory. The first small win came when he was asked to lead a presentation for his new team. The old version of him would have crumbled under the pressure, haunted by memories of past failures. The night before, his anxiety whispered relentlessly, "You'll forget your words. They'll see right through you. You'll embarrass yourself." But he stayed up late, practicing in front of his bathroom mirror. His reflection still carried shadows of doubt, but every time he repeated his lines, his voice grew firmer. He rehearsed until exhaustion finally dragged him into sleep. The next day, as he stood before his colleagues, his hands trembled slightly. But when he began to speak, something unexpected happened. His voice didn't crack. His thoughts didn't scatter. He delivered his points clearly, confidently. And when he finished, the room filled with nods, smiles, and even applause. That applause echoed in his chest long after the meeting ended. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. It was proof that he wasn't invisible, proof that he could stand in the light again without burning. Another victory came later, in the smallest of moments. One afternoon, he received an email from a client thanking him for his work, calling it thoughtful and impactful. He read it 3 times just to make sure it was real. The words sank into him, erasing years of inner voices that had once insisted he was useless. These wins weren't just external. They were reshaping him internally. He started to wake up before his alarm, energized by purpose. He walked taller. His shoulders no longer caved inward. Even the way he ordered coffee had changed. Steady eye contact, a confident tone, no longer apologizing simply for existing. Yet progress wasn't without its trials. There were still bad days, moments when mistakes threatened to pull him back into old fears. But unlike before, he no longer drowned in them. Instead, he treated them as lessons. If he stumbled, he got up. If he failed, he adjusted. One rainy evening, he paused in the glow of a street lamp, the city blurred in the wet shine of pavement. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't obsessing over the weight of past failures. Instead, he was looking forward to the next step, the next opportunity, the next challenge. And that realization hit him like lightning. Life wasn't about one grand victory that erased all failures. It was about collecting small wins, stacking them like stones, until one day you looked back and saw you had built a path out of the darkness. He smiled, rain sliding down his face, and whispered into the night, "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm winning, even if it's one small step at a time." And those small victories, strung together, began to feel like destiny in motion. Momentum is a strange thing. At first, it feels invisible, like a faint breeze you're not sure you can trust. But once it grows, once it gathers force, it becomes unstoppable. That's what he was beginning to experience now. The small victories of the past few weeks were no longer isolated sparks. They were starting to form a fire. Each success gave him more courage, and each step forward reinforced the idea that maybe, just maybe, he was no longer the man defined by his failures. He began waking up before dawn, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The mornings that once felt heavy and endless now carried a kind of electricity. He'd sit by the window with his notebook, the world still quiet, and write out his goals for the day. They weren't lofty dreams anymore. They were tangible steps. Finish the report, make the call, learn the skill. And when he finished those steps, he didn't just check them off. He celebrated them, no matter how small. Each check mark was a reminder. You're moving forward. Opportunities began appearing, almost as if the world had been waiting for him to rise again. A colleague recommended him for a bigger project. A mentor, who had once kept their distance, called to say, "I see the change in you." Even friends who had drifted away during his darker days started coming back, drawn to the light they hadn't seen in him for years. But momentum wasn't just about external validation. It was about how he carried himself. The man who once avoided eye contact now entered rooms with presence. His posture straightened, his tone sharpened. When he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because his words carried conviction earned through scars. One evening, after a particularly successful presentation, he stood outside the office building, staring at his reflection in the glass doors. For a long moment, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him, not because he looked different physically, but because of the way he radiated something intangible, belief. It struck him then that failure hadn't disappeared. It was still a shadow, always ready to creep back in if he let it. But now, he had built enough momentum to stay ahead of it. Every step forward widened the gap between him and the man who used to doubt himself. Of course, the path wasn't flawless. There were still setbacks, meetings that didn't go as planned, projects that fell apart. But instead of collapsing under them, he treated each stumble as a chance to refine. Failure was no longer a cage. It was a tool, shaping him sharper, stronger, more resilient. One night, as he sat at his desk, exhausted but fulfilled, he realized something powerful. He no longer feared tomorrow. For years, each new day it felt like a burden, a test he was destined to fail. But now, tomorrow was possibility. Tomorrow was promise. Tomorrow was his to shape. And with that realization, he whispered to himself with conviction that sent chills down his spine. I'm not just changing, I'm becoming unstoppable. The momentum was no longer just carrying him forward. It was transforming him. The man who once thought failure was permanent was now learning the greatest truth of all. Success is not one massive leap. It is a steady rhythm of forward steps, building until they create an avalanche. And his avalanche was coming. The day didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no thunder in the sky, no triumphant music swelling in the background. The morning was quiet, almost ordinary, the kind of morning that could have belonged to his old life. But what made it different was him. He woke before the sun, as he often did now, and stared out the window at the faint glow of dawn breaking across the horizon. His chest rose with calm, steady breaths. The man who once woke with dread now woke with purpose. And today, though he didn't know it yet, the years of failure and rebuilding would collide into a moment that would change his life. At work, a high-stakes opportunity had landed in his lap, a pitch that could make or break not just his career, but the fragile confidence he had been building. He had prepared relentlessly, nights spent rehearsing, mornings spent refining. Still, as he stood outside the boardroom, clutching his notes, that familiar whispered doubt crept in. What if you fail again? What if all this momentum collapses here? He closed his eyes. For a second, he was back in every rejection, every humiliation, every night he had cried into the silence. He felt the weight of it all pressing on his shoulders. But then, just as quickly, another voice rose inside him, one forged in the fire of every setback. You've already lived through the worst. This is your moment to rise. The doors opened. He stepped inside. The room was full of sharp suits and sharper eyes, people who had doubted him before, people who wouldn't hesitate to dismiss him if he faltered. His hands trembled slightly as he set his papers down. But instead of hiding the nerves, he leaned into the fire burning in his chest. The first words he spoke weren't flawless. His voice cracked slightly, his breath uneven, but then something shifted. He stopped trying to perform and started speaking from the truth carved into him by failure. He told his story, not as a victim, but as someone who had clawed his way back, who had learned resilience the hard way. He painted a vision so vivid, so undeniable, that the room leaned in. The suit stopped seeing just a man pitching an idea. They saw conviction. They saw strength. They saw someone who had been broken and rebuilt, stronger than before. By the time he finished, the silence in the room wasn't doubt. It was reverence. Then came the nods, the questions, the spark of belief spreading across faces that once held skepticism. And when the final handshake came, firm and assured, he knew this was a turning point. As he walked out of that boardroom, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, washing over him like a spotlight. He paused in the hallway, breathless, realizing he wasn't the same man who had once been defined by repeated failure. That man had been necessary, the foundation, the painful chiseling that shaped him, but he no longer lived here. For the first time, he didn't just feel successful, he felt free. Free from the weight of those failures. Free from the voice that told him he wasn't enough. Free from the identity he had carried like a chain. He stepped outside into the crisp air, the city alive with noise and motion, and smiled. Not the forced smile of someone pretending to be okay. A real smile, the kind that came from surviving the storm and stepping into the light. Failure would come again. He knew that. Life was unpredictable, ruthless at times. But now, he carried something greater than fear. He carried proof. Proof that failure wasn't the end. Proof that resilience was born in the ashes. Proof that he could rise, again and again, no matter what. The turning point wasn't a single victory. It was a realization that he no longer lived at the mercy of failure. He had learned to master it, to bend it into strength. And as he walked down the street, head high, heart steady, he whispered words that once felt impossible, but now rang like destiny. This is just the beginning. The bathroom was silent, except for the slow drip of a leaky faucet. He stood barefoot on the cold tiles, his hand gripping the porcelain sink as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The mirror in front of him was cracked in the corner, a jagged reminder of some forgotten accident. But tonight that mirror felt like more than glass. It felt like a judge, a witness, a relentless enemy. At first, he didn't want to look. He splashed water on his face, rubbed his eyes, tried to ignore the weight pressing down on his chest. But eventually, he lifted his gaze, and there it was, his reflection. It startled him, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was too familiar. The tired eyes with dark circles carved beneath them. The lines etched deeper from stress and from age. The slump of shoulders that once carried ambition, but now sagged beneath disappointment. He saw a man, not destroyed by one great tragedy, but by 1,000 tiny failures stacked on top of each other. For a moment, he felt as though the mirror was alive, staring back not just with glass and light, but with accusation. His reflection whispered everything he tried to bury during the day. You wasted time. You betrayed your potential. You let fear decide too many times. You are not who you were supposed to be. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. His own eyes looked foreign, as if another man had taken residence inside him, someone weaker, someone who had given up long ago. He tried to remember the last time he had looked in the mirror and felt proud. He couldn't. It had been years. Memories flashed, uninvited. Late nights in his 20s when he swore he'd start the business. Take the risk, make the call. He saw the job interviews where he had convinced himself he wasn't ready. The relationships where he walked away because he was too afraid of commitment. The mornings he stayed in bed when he should have been chasing opportunity. Each memory was a cut, small but sharp, until he was bleeding inside from wounds no one else could see. The silence in the room grew heavier. He gripped the sink tighter, knuckles white, as if he could hold himself together with sheer force. But the reflection wouldn't let him go. The man staring back seemed older than his years, worn down not by time, but by regret. He whispered aloud, almost afraid of his own voice. What happened to you? The sound echoed in the small room, bouncing back at him like mockery. His throat tightened. The tears threatened, hot and unrelenting, but he swallowed them back. He hated crying. It felt like weakness. And yet, deep down, he knew this was the rawest truth of who he was now, a man consumed by what could have been. He touched the glass, fingertips tracing the cracks that distorted his reflection. The broken mirror felt symbolic. He wasn't whole anymore, just fragments of the person he once imagined himself to be. And the cruelest part? No one else really knew. To the outside world, he was just another man getting by, smiling when expected, nodding in conversations, carrying the mask of normalcy. But here, in front of the mirror, the mask fell apart. For the first time in a long while, he didn't see just a face. He saw the life he didn't live. He saw the potential buried beneath excuses. He saw a stranger who had worn his skin for too long. And in that suffocating silence, one truth became unavoidable. Regret wasn't just behind him. It was staring him down, alive in the mirror, demanding he face it. He couldn't look away. The reflection didn't release him. It pulled him deeper, as if the mirror wasn't glass anymore, but a window into his past. His pulse quickened. He blinked, and suddenly it wasn't just his present self staring back. It was a ghost of all the choices he never made. It started small. A memory flickered like an old film reel. He was 21 again, standing in front of a classroom bulletin board plastered with internship flyers. His heart had pounded with excitement back then. He remembered circling one particular flyer, marketing internship in New York City. He had dreamed of working in the city, of skyscrapers and ambition, of a life that stretched far beyond the small town he felt trapped in. But then came the doubt. What if I'm not good enough? What if they don't pick me? He tore the flyer down, stuffed in his backpack, and told himself he'd apply later. He never did. The memory dissolved, and another took its place. He was 25, sitting in a coffee shop with a girl who laughed like sunlight. She had been the kind of person who made silence feel full, the kind who made him believe he could be more than his failures. He remembered the way she had leaned forward, eyes shining, when she asked, "Do you see a future with me?" He had hesitated, not because he didn't feel it, but because he was afraid. Afraid of responsibility. Afraid of failing her the way he had failed himself. He had shrugged, mumbled something about not being ready. He still remembered the way her smile faded, the way she looked at him one last time before walking out of the cafe. He never saw her again. The images came faster now, each one cutting deeper. A phone call from a friend inviting him to join a startup. He said no, afraid of risk, a chance to travel abroad when he was still young, still free. He declined, convincing himself it was impractical. The countless mornings he hit snooze, telling himself tomorrow he'd start running, tomorrow he'd start writing, tomorrow he'd begin. Tomorrow had become years. The weight of those choices, or rather, the lack of them, pressed down on his chest until he could hardly breathe. The bathroom around him blurred, the mirror fogging again with his ragged breath. He wanted to look away, to shut it out, but the past was relentless. And then came the sharpest memory of all. He was 30, standing in a small office, staring at a resignation letter on his desk. His boss had been offering him a promotion, a chance to climb, to lead, to finally step into the life he always claimed he wanted. But the fear returned. What if I can't handle it? What if I fail in front of everyone? Instead of signing the acceptance papers, he typed out his resignation. He walked away, convincing himself he'd figure things out. Instead, he spiraled. That single choice had set the tone for the years that followed. His hands trembled against the sink. These weren't just echoes. They were wounds reopening. He could hear the voices from each moment, could feel the hesitation that had defined him. Regret wasn't just about the opportunities lost. It was about the man he could have been if he had only been brave enough to choose differently. The mirror seemed to flicker with every version of himself he had abandoned. The young dreamer, the hopeful lover, the ambitious professional. Each one stared back at him with disappointment, shaking their heads, silently asking, "Why didn't you fight for us?" He pressed his palms harder against the sink, shutting his eyes, but the memories still poured in like water flooding a broken dam. His life wasn't a single failure. It was a collection of hesitations, each one building into the storm of regret that now consumed him. And as the silence returned, as the ghost of his choices faded back into glass, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't haunted by fate. He was haunted by himself. The bathroom was silent, but inside his head a storm was raging. The mirror didn't need to show him memories anymore. His own mind had taken over, conjuring a voice that had followed him for years. Cold, sharp, unrelenting. "You've wasted your life." The words weren't spoken aloud, but he heard them as clearly as if someone stood behind him. His reflection seemed to mouth them, lips curling in disgust. He gripped the edge of the sink tighter, veins standing out along his forearms. Every chance you had, you let slip away. Every dream you carried, you dropped. Look at you now, pathetic, a shell. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Stop, just stop." But the voice only grew louder, feeding off his desperation. You could have been successful. You could have had love, purpose, respect. But you were too afraid, too weak, and now it's too late. His chest tightened. He felt as if the walls were closing in, the air thinning. The mirror seemed to warp, his reflection sneering at him, mocking him. He slammed his fist against the glass, but it didn't crack. The only thing that broke was the fragile illusion that he still had control. The voice shifted tone, softer now, almost seductive. "Why even try anymore? You've proven what you are. A failure. No one believes in you. You don't even believe in yourself." He staggered back from the sink, pressing his palms to his ears as if he could block the voice out. His knees hit the cold tile, his body trembling. Memories from earlier, lost chances, broken love, abandoned opportunities, spun in his mind like vultures circling a dying animal. You had everything once. Potential, hope, time. But time is gone now. Potential wasted. And hope? Hope is for people who haven't already proven themselves worthless. Tears blurred his vision. He whispered through clenched teeth, "I'm not worthless." The voice laughed, cruel and sharp, echoing in his skull. "Then prove it." "Oh, wait, you can't. Because you never do. You just talk, you just dream, you just hesitate." always waiting for tomorrow, while tomorrow slips into never. He collapsed fully onto the floor, his breath shallow. The ceiling above him swayed in his vision, the light bulb flickering, as though even the room agreed with the voice. He wanted silence, desperate for it, but the voice pressed harder, relentless. Face it, you've already lost. There's no coming back from this. You don't change at 30, or 40, or 50. You stay broken. And broken people don't get rebuilt. His hands curled into fists against the tile. Every fiber of him screamed to fight back. But doubt was heavy, pressing on him like an ocean he couldn't swim through. The voice whispered one last dagger. You failed, and that's all you'll ever be. He lay there in the silence that followed, the words burning into him, seeping into his veins like poison. The weight of them felt permanent, inescapable. And as he stared at the ceiling, one truth gnawed at him more than anything else. He was starting to believe it. The next morning, sunlight spilled across his small bedroom, but it didn't feel like light. It felt like exposure. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. He reached for it with heavy fingers, the glow stabbing at his tired eyes. A notification, a social media post. He tapped it open, and there it was, a smiling face of his past. A friend, no, more like a ghost of another lifetime. They had sat in the same classrooms, shared the same cheap pizza after late-night cramming, even whispered their dreams to each other in hushed tones when the world still felt conquerable. But the image on the screen showed something else now. A man in a tailored suit, standing before a polished office tower, his caption reading, "Another milestone achieved. Couldn't have done it without persistence and faith." His chest tightened. He could almost hear the echoes of their conversations years ago. One day, man. One day we'll make it big. But that one day had arrived only for the other. For him, it had never come. His thumb scrolled down almost involuntarily. Another face. Another memory. Another success. Weddings, children, homes, businesses launched, adventures taken, milestones marked. One after another. The feed filled with lives that had moved forward while it had stalled in place. Every smile he saw felt like a blade. Every caption like a reminder written directly to him. See what you could have been? The voice from the night before crept back in, whispering slyly. They were no smarter than you. No braver. No more gifted. The only difference? They acted, and you didn't. His throat burned. He tossed the phone onto the bed, but the images wouldn't leave. He could still see them behind his eyelids, their grins haunting him, their joy mocking him. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something heavier, something darker, a suffocating realization that he had fallen behind so far. Catching up seemed impossible. He pulled himself to the window, staring out at the city below. People hurried to jobs, kids rushed with backpacks. Cars streamed like veins carrying ambition across the streets. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, something to do, someone waiting for them. And then there was him, frozen in place, watching life pass by like a ghost pressed against the glass. His reflection faintly appeared in the window, overlapping with the bustling world outside. For a moment, it was as though he stood both inside and outside at once, trapped behind a barrier of his own regret, while life carried on without him. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Look at them. Look at me. His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. Same start, different ending. The laughter dissolved into silence, into an ache that spread through his chest like a fire he couldn't put out. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. The comparisons weren't just casual. They were a noose tightening around his neck. He didn't just see their success. He felt their progress as an indictment of his failure. Their joy became his grief. Their achievements became his accusations. The phone buzzed again, another notification lighting up. He didn't look this time. He couldn't. It was easier to imagine it was another milestone, another happy story, another reminder of everything he wasn't. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the air thick. He whispered to himself, almost pleading, "Why not me? Why couldn't it have been me?" The silence that followed was merciless. There was no answer, only the gnawing truth that regret had grown a new face, comparison. and it was eating him alive. The night was thick, heavy with silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, that magnifies every sound. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the uneven rhythm of his own breathing. He sat in the corner of his dimly lit apartment, the only light spilling from a single lamp, its yellow glow too weak to fight the shadows. His phone lay face down on the floor. He hadn't touched it in hours, but the buzzing from earlier still echoed in his skull, as though the ghosts of those notifications had embedded themselves into his mind. His chest rose and fell, erratic, his hands trembling. The weight of the day, the faces on the screen, the mirror's truth, the years wasted, pressed against him until it became unbearable. The comparisons he'd swallowed now churned into poison. He whispered, as if confessing to the darkness, "I can't do this anymore." The words barely left his lips, but in the silence, they sounded thunderous. His eyes blurred with hot tears. His throat ached, like something inside was trying to claw its way out. He grabbed his hair with both hands, pulling until his scalp screamed, as though physical pain might drown out the ache in his chest. Memories assaulted him. Every failed attempt, every abandoned dream. Every time he'd told himself tomorrow only to watch tomorrow die stillborn. The night twisted them into knives, replaying his life as a cruel highlight reel. He saw his younger self, bright-eyed and unscarred, making promises. "I'll make something of myself." He saw the people who believed in him, who had invested their faith, now far away, living full lives without him. He saw doors that could have opened, paths that could have been taken, slammed shut forever. The more he thought, the louder it became, until the silence was filled with a roar only he could hear. Regret wasn't just whispering now, it was screaming. He stood abruptly, pacing, hands shaking. His reflection caught him in the dark window again, a hollow shell staring back. He pointed at it, voice breaking. "You're a failure. Do you hear me? You wasted it all. Look at you. Look at you." The words bounced back from the empty walls, echoing, mocking. He staggered to the kitchen, opened a cupboard, then another. Empty cereal boxes, stale crackers, dust. His fridge hummed cold but nearly barren. Even his home reflected his stagnation. Nothing full, nothing alive, only scraps. The emptiness seeped into him, a mirror of his soul. He leaned against the counter, body trembling. A sob broke loose, loud, raw, uncontrollable. He slid to the floor, knees pulling to his chest, arms wrapping around himself like he could hold the pieces together. The tears poured until he could hardly breathe. His shirt clung to his chest with sweat and salt. He felt like a child again, lost, small, terrified, wanting someone, anyone, to reach down and say it would be okay. But no one came. The clock ticked on. The night grew heavier. And he remained there, crumpled against the cold kitchen tiles, his sobs echoing into nothing. For the first time, he let himself feel the full weight of regret. Not as a dull ache, not as a whisper, but as a storm tearing him apart. And deep inside, a thought surfaced, dark, dangerous. Maybe it would be easier if I just didn't wake up tomorrow. The idea lingered in the silence, hovering, tempting. His body stilled, his sobs fading, replaced by an eerie calm. It terrified him, because for the first time, he wasn't just regretting the past. He was questioning if he had any future at all. That night, he reached his breaking point. The man who had once carried dreams now sat shattered, staring into the abyss, unsure if he even wanted to climb out. The night had been endless. His body ached from crying, his head throbbed, his eyes swollen. He sat slumped against the kitchen counter, the floor beneath him cold as stone. He had whispered those dangerous words hours ago. Maybe it would be easier, and the thought still lingered like smoke in his lungs, impossible to breathe out. But then something happened. At first, it was nothing, just a faint sound, soft and almost imperceptible. His phone buzzed where it lay on the floor, face down, its dull vibration crawling across the wood. He ignored it. He had ignored every call, every message, every notification for weeks. But this one didn't stop. Another buzz, then another, a pause, then the trill of a ringtone slicing through the suffocating silence. He cursed under his breath, reaching for the device with a shaking hand. He didn't intend to answer, just to silence it. But when the screen lit up, he froze. The name on the screen hit him like a lightning strike. It wasn't a bank, not spam, not some distant relative. It was his oldest friend, the one who knew him before the world had beaten him down, the one who had seen him dream when his dreams were still alive. For a moment, he stared at the glowing name, thumb hovering. His chest tightened. Answering meant admitting he was still alive. It meant facing a voice that might remember the person he used to be. The phone kept ringing. His hand trembled. And then, almost against his own will, he swiped to accept. "Hello." His voice cracked, hoarse from hours of silence and tears. There was a pause, then a voice filled the room, warm, steady, familiar. "Man, are you okay? I don't know why, but I couldn't stop thinking about you tonight. Something told me to call." The words hit him harder than he expected. No judgment, no scolding, just concern, just care. His lips parted, but no words came. A choke sound escaped instead. The friend continued softly. "Listen, I don't care what's going on. You don't have to explain anything. Just don't give up, all right? I know you. I know you. You're stronger than you think. I believe that." Tears welled again, but these weren't like the ones before. They weren't from shame or self-loathing. They were from something else, something fragile, something he hadn't felt in so long that it seemed foreign. Hope. It wasn't a fire. Not yet. Just a spark. But in the thick darkness, even a spark is blinding. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, his body shaking. The friend kept talking. About small memories, about things he used to laugh at, about the times when life felt full of possibility. And with every word, it was as if someone was stitching back a piece of his broken self. When the call finally ended, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. It wasn't heavy, suffocating. It was lighter. He sat there, staring at the dark window. His reflection still looked hollow, bruised, tired. But behind the emptiness, behind the swollen eyes, he noticed something. His chest was still rising. His heart was still beating. His hands, though trembling, were still alive. He was still here. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't want to disappear. That night, nothing changed on the outside. The apartment was still dim, his life still a mess, his failures still real. But something inside shifted. It was tiny, almost invisible. But it was there, a flicker of hope. Morning arrived not like a gentle visitor, but like an intruder. Light pushed its way through the blinds. Spilling across the room, he hadn't cleaned in weeks. Dust shimmered in the air. Bottles lay tipped over on the counter. Crumpled paper scattered like evidence of a life abandoned. He stirred awake from a shallow, restless sleep on the floor. His back ached, his mouth dry, his head pounding. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the weight of it all came crashing back. The failures, the mistakes, the regrets. But something was different this time. The hopelessness wasn't absolute. There was still a lingering warmth in his chest, fragile but real, like embers refusing to die out. Last night's phone call echoed in his memory. "I know you. You're stronger than you think." He sat up slowly, groaning as if every bone resisted movement. His eyes caught the mirror again across the room, the same mirror that had haunted him, showing him only emptiness and shame. He stared at it now, heart pounding. He almost didn't want to look, but he did. The reflection was raw, pale skin, sunken eyes, a man worn down by battles no one could see. For a moment, regret whispered again, "Look at you, broken, hopeless." But then something shifted. For the first time, he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He held his own gaze. "Yes," he whispered, voice rough. "I failed. I messed up. I hurt myself. I wasted time. I lost things I can't get back." His throat tightened. Tears brimmed again, but not the same kind as before. "But I'm still here." The words hung in the silence, heavier than any confession he had ever made. "I'm still here." And in that moment, he understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. Regret didn't have to be a prison. It could be a teacher. It could be fuel. The pain was proof of what mattered. The emptiness meant there was space to rebuild. He pushed himself up from the floor, unsteady but determined. His legs trembled, but he stood. Standing felt like defiance. The apartment still looked like chaos, but he grabbed a trash bag and began picking things up, slowly, mechanically at first, then with more intention. Each bottle dropped into bag sounded like a declaration. I'm not done. The sunlight stretched further across the room, as if approving. When he finished, he collapsed into the chair, exhausted but strangely lighter. His phone lay on the table, screen dark. He reached for it, opened the contact list, and scrolled down. This time, he didn't wait for someone to call him. He chose to call. Hey! His voice cracked when his friend answered. I don't know how to say this, but thank you for last night, for reminding me. The friend's response was simple but steady. That's what I'm here for. And listen, you don't have to do this alone. He closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Alone. That word had defined his nights, his spiral, his regret. But it didn't have to define what came next. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man who could still write a new chapter. Later that day, he left the apartment. The air outside was sharp and cool. The sky stretched wide and unapologetic. People moved past him, busy with their own lives, but he walked among them not as a shadow, but as someone slowly returning. He didn't have a plan yet. He didn't have answers. But he had something better than certainty. He had a decision to try again. And in that decision, he found power, because regret wasn't the end of his story. It was the proof that he still cared enough to change it. As he walked further, the city alive around him, he whispered to himself like a vow, this is not how my story ends. And for the first time in a long, long time, he believed it. When we talked about his journey, we saw how words carried power. Let me show you. He looked in the mirror and whispered, I failed. I messed up. I wasted time. But I'm still here. Backhand index pointing right here are some phrases we can learn. I messed up. This is an informal way to admit a mistake. Instead of just saying, I failed, saying, I messed up makes it personal and real. I'm still here, a simple phrase, but powerful. It means I survived. I didn't give up. I didn't disappear. This is not how my story ends. This is a metaphor. In English, when we say my story, we mean our life, our journey. And saying not how my story ends means I will not give up here. There's more ahead. Notice how these aren't just vocabulary. They're affirmations, words you can use in your own daily life when you need strength. Face the mirror, don't run from it. Accept your mistakes. The first step to change is honesty with yourself. Regret is a teacher, not a prison. Every failure holds a lesson. Instead of staying stuck in guilt, ask, what can I learn? Reach out before you collapse. You don't have to carry pain alone. Asking for help is not weakness. It's courage. Write a new chapter. No matter how bad yesterday was, today is blank paper. Start again. So let me leave you with this. You may feel broken, tired, and full of regret. But remember, the mirror is not showing you your end. It's showing you your beginning. The fact that you feel pain means your heart still cares. The fact that you're listening right now means you haven't given up. And maybe your life isn't perfect. Maybe you've messed up. But like our character, you can stand, whisper to yourself. Backhand index pointing right. I'm still here. And this is not how my story ends. Because your story is still being written. And the pen is in your hands.